From the City of Angels near the Pacific Ocean, good morning, good evening, wherever you may be across the nation, around the world. I'm George Noory. Welcome to this program that we call Coast to Coast AM. First of all, happy Easter to those of you of the Eastern Orthodox faith. Hope you had an enjoyable day. Emerging artists for the first couple hours tonight, and later on tonight, it's called the Electric Universe. Here's what's happening. Nearly 4 million Nissan cars are being recalled due to major safety problems where passenger airbags or seat belts could fail in a crash, leading to serious injuries or even death. The two recalls are just the latest in a string of safety problems to hit automakers in the past year, with Acura, BMW, Chrysler, Ford, Honda, Lexus, Mazda, Toyota, and other manufacturers having to recall cars over airbag problems. Now, the Nissan problems are unrelated to the other airbag issues. Nissan of North America said 3.2 million cars may have a problem with a sensor that detects if the front passenger seat is occupied and if that passenger is an adult or a child. Defective sensors might incorrectly think that an adult is a child or classify the seat as empty and turning off the airbag. You will get notified, or call your dealer and just tell them your make a car, and they'll be able to check for you instantly on that. 2 car bombings in a southern city in Iraq killed 31 people, wounded dozens, the latest in a series of large attacks claimed by the Islamic State group as the country there grapples with a worsening political crisis. Texas Senator Ted Cruz admits he's putting all his eggs into Indiana, but a new poll suggests that a win Tuesday in the Hoosier State's Republican presidential primary against frontrunner Donald Trump may be too high a mountain to climb for him. Now, he made his comments the same day as a new NBC Wall Street Journal Marist poll shows that Trump leading him by 15 percentage points in Indiana. The Obama administration has released its progress report on the gun control policy that the president first presented in January. A key pillar of that report is smart gun technology. For the first time, the administration is presenting guidelines for federal, state, and local law enforcement to define smart guns, an umbrella term used enabling only authorized people to shoot weapons to curb violence. John Lott, noted author of More Guns, Less Crime, with us. John, in this particular case, explain what a smart gun is and how it works.
Well, there's basically 2 different types of models. One is you wear a watch that emits a radio signal, and that allows the gun to operate. Without the signal being on, the gun won't fire. The other one is similar to what people have in their cell phones, where you have a fingerprint reader that would be there.
Okay.
The problem with both of those is that there are real problems with safety, and there's real concerns that they could result in more deaths rather than fewer deaths. So, for example, with the radio signals can be jammed. I mean, could you imagine police arriving on the scene at a crime and finding that their signals are being jammed so they're unable to fire their gun?
Oh, my gosh. Interesting. Yeah. Well, John, with this situation, I mean, how realistic is it to get these smart guns out there on the marketplace?
Well, I mean, they can get something out there. There already is a gun that requires that someone wears one of these watches that emits a radio signal. The issues are both cost and safety. The watch and the gun, in that case, costs about $1,800. So
that's more than the gun.
But it's just a regular gun. Beyond the fact that it has this electronic feature there. My own concern is that for a lot of people, it's going to price guns out of people's ability to go and purchase them if they ever made these a mandate. And I fear that that's one of the reasons why it's being pushed.
All right, John. Thank you. John's website, by the way, linked up at coasttocoastam.com. The late musician and singer Prince signed up for rehab to battle his pain pill addiction before his untimely death. The 57-year-old sensation singer knew he was hooked on Percocet before his death, possibly of an overdose last week, so he entered an outpatient treatment center. The superstar attended the unnamed rehab center to move away from using medication prescribed for his severe hip pain. It was too late. Coffee conglomerate Starbucks is being sued for $5 million over the amount of ice the drink maker puts in its iced beverages. Go figure. The U.S. Geological Survey reporting a small earthquake in western Kentucky. It was a 3.5 magnitude quake, but are there any more planned? Let's check in with Stan Dale because he's got all the data. Stan, what do you think?
Oh, I think we'll see some more. The beta test system I've been developing to forecast quakes again did hit a few accurately, some off of Fukushima after we talked last week.
Yeah.
I'm seeing signs that we're going to get some small quakes in Ecuador or right on the coast of Ecuador, down in Chile as well. And I think it's Oaxaca, it's where the little elbow of Mexico is. And there's a slight sign in the Gulf of California and one up at the Seattle, the SeaTac area, and possibly a small one, not to mention anything, off the coast of L.A. What is of interest, however, is that we're approaching the supermoon this month.
Oh, boy. Yeah.
And now supermoons, I think we have 6 of them total for the year. There'll be some more down October, November. Normally, there isn't a good correlation between supermoons and earthquake, occurrences. That's just a matter of stats. However, something unusual is happening now, and scientists are saying that because of the changes in the aquifer, like out where you are, they're being drained, and the melting of poles and ice in other places, it's changing the geoid, the shape of the Earth, and the wobble of the North Pole as well. And this, coupled with a supermoon, might trigger some quakes that are ready to go. Now, I don't know if this is meaning that the big one is going to hit off the coast of Oregon and Washington, or if San Andreas is going to go. But I would be cautious of Thursday, Friday, and Saturday this week for a major quake somewhere on the planet because of this bulge it's forming as part of the supermoon thing, and because of the wobble in the Earth from global warming and all that kind of stuff they're saying is causing it.
Stay in touch with us, and Stan's website, StanDale, DEYO.com. He's got lots of great information there, and his wife, Holly, put together a great book on preparedness as well. Stan, thank you so much. A Dutch carpenter, inspired by a dream to build a massive replica of Noah's Ark, has a new and equally daunting vision to bring the 410-foot vessel to the Americas in time for this summer's Olympic Games in Brazil. Johan Huber's impressive boat, built at a cost of nearly $4 million, is moored some 60 miles south of Amsterdam, a popular tourist attraction drawing as many as 3,000 visitors a day. Now, to haul it across the ocean will cost about $1.5 million. Maybe he should just wait for a flood and just let it float over. And thousands of Orthodox Christians are flocking to a church in southwest Chicago to witness what they believe is a miracle. We've got this story highlighted for you at coasttocoastam.com. According to the Chicago Tribune, tiny drops of sweet-smelling oil have been trickling down an icon of John the Baptist at the Assumption Greek Orthodox Church in Homer Glen. The parishioners believe the droplets have healing properties. It's an amazing story. Again, we've got it for you at coasttocoastam.com. Up next, positive thinking will never change your life, but this book will. The Myth of Positive Thinking, the Reality of Success. David Eisel joins us next on Coast to Coast AM. And welcome back to Coast to Coast. George Noory with you. For 30 years, David Eisel has been considered one of the leading experts in the field of personal growth. He's the author of a number of books. He's a television radio host, a master in business relationships. He's a success coach as well. He's got it all, inspirational speaker. His mission is to inspire people to reach their own potential in their business and personal life. And here's David on Coast to Coast. David, fascinating work you do.
George, it has been all-consuming, and I love it. Very passionate about what we're doing here.
This is super. Interesting title to the book. Positive thinking will never change your life, but this book will. I like that.
Well, you know what? You have to be bold, right? You have to be bold in life, George. And that's what came out. After being in this whole world of personal growth and self-realization, 30 years now, we started seeing that some of the things that we were even teaching in our work a number of years ago, George, were dead wrong. In other words, so many people have heard of the phrases like, if you think it, you can live it. If you can believe it, you can achieve it. And those phrases sound so good, but unless it's a miracle, they are not true. So we decided to put a book together to really destroy the myth of positive thinking. And it's not that positive thinking isn't great, but it just can't do what so many people tell us it can do.
And the reason for that would be exactly why.
Well, first of all, the reason why people love that kind of stuff, if you believe it, you can achieve it, is because it sounds so simple. And then we have books that came out like The Secret and the Law of Attraction that you and I will get into later on in our conversation. And we were actually leading people down these roads of saying you don't really have to do a lot other than use the power of your mind. And it just doesn't work. I'm going to go back to this, George. I love positive thinking. Throughout the book, I tell people how much I love it, how I use it every day. But unless it's a miracle, your thoughts are not going to create $1 million, a perfect body, or attract the greatest lover you could ever imagine.
No, they're not. But do you have to at least start with positive thinking?
I love that question. The answer is no.
Really? I always thought you had to do that.
You know, when one of the areas that we work in is addiction recovery, and we tell people you don't have to believe that you can drop the alcohol, the cocaine, the food addiction, the nicotine, the spending. You don't have to believe it. Just come and do the work. So you don't even have to be a positive thinker, George, in order to accomplish great things. But here's the cool thing, is that once you start to do the work, it's amazing how your attitude will change. But too many people have said, well, you know what, I just genetically don't have the gift to be positive, or my parents looked at everything as the glass half empty, and I do too. You just can't change it, so I can't have a great life. That's not true.
So let's talk a little bit then of what positive thinking might be, because if you don't need it, how about somebody who's negative and, puts a cloud over his head? Is he going to succeed still?
Well, and again, your question is wonderful. We've had people come in that have become multimillionaires with the most negative mindset you could ever imagine. Now, would I recommend that? No. I wouldn't at all. We've worked with couples and helped them save a relationship where one of them still stayed very Debbie Downer, but they were able to do the work and get back on track and save the relationship. I really believe, and I think my life is a testament to it, is that you can have a heck of a lot more fun, George, if you do have a more optimistic attitude and a positive mindset. But that alone is not going to get you out of – as a matter of fact, let me give you a powerful example. I was on a radio show about a month ago, and the host of the show is a huge fan of positive thinking and is some type of a doctor in the world of psychology. Okay. And she was really concerned and upset with the book because she said, there are studies out there that show that people with deep depression and deep anxiety, if they just think positively, they can shatter years of depression and years of anxiety. And, George, in my work with people with deep anxiety and deep depression of 30 years, I have never, ever seen anyone shift it by positive thinking alone.
Well, see, that's a key phrase, alone. You've got to be able to add other ingredients with it, don't you?
Yeah, and what we have proven throughout the book and through the years of doing the work is that positive thinking, and this is so important for our listeners to take notes with, positive thinking will account for about 20% of someone's success, George. That's it. Unless it's a miracle and they were thinking positively and they had a remission of cancer, which I pray would happen to everyone that thought positively, or they thought positively and their partner came back to them, or they thought positively and they lost 300 pounds. But in general, it's only going to have about a 20% effect on your overall success in life. That 80% is the secret.
Now, when we were kids, they kept pelting us with that story of the little engine that could. And so that's how we were raised, David. That's
right. Hey, and George, you're right. And I'm going to say this again, and we'll probably say it 100 times during our time together here tonight. There's such a benefit of positive thinking. There really is. It just isn't the magic bullet that people want us to believe. If we look at those statements, if you believe it, you can achieve it. The books that have come out in the last 10 years that tell us to sit back and build a vision board and sit back and say the right affirmation or meditate in the perfect way or do something and your whole life is going to radically change. It just isn't working. So that little train that could, is that beneficial to think, get up in the morning and, I can do it today? It's beneficial to a point. What we've found through research is that when someone has a positive thought, there's an instant cascade of chemicals released in the brain like serotonin, dopamine, GABA. Really good neurotransmitters, George, are released immediately with that thought. But the problem is that you can't keep surging those positive chemicals by thinking, I can throughout the whole day. It's just not possible. So we get discouraged. And we created the book to give people hope that, yes, positive thinking is important, but let me remind you, it's only going to account for about 20% of someone's great success in life. But let's not get hung up on it. Use it, but then let it go.
We're going to talk about some stories that you have in the book that are just amazing. You talked about addictions and what people can do. How would you have handled the Prince situation had he come to you?
Well, the first thing is I would say, who are you? Who's your circle of influence? Because there's a darn good chance that whoever was in his inner circle of influence could be partly to blame, if you will, or enabled him to utilize the drugs, if it were the drugs that he used that killed him.
Or they were afraid to tell him no.
Yes. And so there was enablers. So if he would have come to me, the very first thing in addiction, we have a holistic addiction recovery program that we teach, George. And so the very first thing is we'd say, let's write down a list of all these people who are your confidants and which of those are enabling you, are helping you to purchase, are telling you it's okay. Because we've got to remove them first, right, which is one of the most difficult things for any addict to do, George.
Yes, they could be his best friends.
Yeah, his best friend. It could be a partner. It could be family members. I mean, this is brutal. But if he did die from an overdose and it was the painkillers that he was taking, he probably was surrounded by people that were telling him it was okay. And that would have been step one in my world.
What if they were just too weak, David, to say no to him? Well, he was the one with the money, so he was the driving force here. What if he simply said to all his friends, shut up, I'm doing it my way, this is the way it's going to be done?
George, more often than not, even in family situations that wouldn't be someone of such high profile, a wife can enable the husband, a husband can enable the wife and husband can enable the kids to keep their addiction going dead on, and they can do the same thing that you just said. We're talking about one of the most difficult things in the world for an addict. Spending, drugs, food, sex, it doesn't matter what it is. One of the most difficult steps is to get outside of their comfort zone, not just not using the substance, but their comfort zone of people that have enabled them to carry on. And the more money you have, what you just said, George, the more money you have, the easier it is to stay addicted longer.
Originally, in one of your books, you talked about intention. And it's my impression that you were very positive about that. Am I right?
George, you've got a great memory. The last time I was on the show was for our best-selling book, Slow Down.
Slow Down. That's
the
right.
fastest way to get everything you want. And I'm making amends with this new book, George. I am making amends. I am going back to all these people that I worked with over the years. I hosted a nationally syndicated radio show for 24 years, and I'm saying I was wrong. In my book, Slow Down, I talk about intention, gratitude, and action, the three major keys to radically change your life. And we put a lot of effort, George. You've got a great memory. We put a lot of effort into that word intention. And if you have the right intention, you can change your life. Intention is great, but what did our parents say about intentions? Do you remember that? What was that statement? Like, the best intentions pave the way to hell or something like that. And so people, again, let's go in the last 10 years, myself included, up until from 2006 on, I started to walk away from even the book that I wrote, Slow Down. And people have said, just get your mindset straight, positive, write down the greatest intentions and your world will change. George, it's not true.
All right, stay with us, David. We're going to continue talking about this. I want to get into why you believe The Secret and the Law of Attraction are so popular these days. And we'll get into some of these incredible stories. How about a homeless guy who became a millionaire? And we're back with David Essel, author of Positive Thinking Will Never Change Your Life, but This Book Will. David, the Law of Attraction, The Secret, selling millions. Tell me why they were so popular.
George, they tapped into something that we write about in the book called human nature, and it's ingrained in our DNA, we really believe. And human nature, the definition that we use, is the desire for human beings to get the most out of life with minimal effort. And if you think about advertising and marketing, we are being bombarded on a regular basis to buy things we can't afford, but we can definitely max out credit cards and we can get extended payment plans. So we want the most out of life with minimal effort.
Right.
And in this psychology that we teach all of our clients and we teach in our books, we're telling people is that, when they say, I don't understand why I can't lose weight. I've been taking these green tea pills. But, we say that's human nature. And those books, now listen, they're great for entertainment, George, and I'm not knocking the books in regards to their entertainment value, and they do have seeds of truth. But basically what they've done is they've tapped into human nature. They have tapped into our desire to get the most out of life with minimal effort. So when the books go into great detail about if you say affirmations for a half an hour a day or journal for 45 minutes a day about what you want to bring into your life, or you create a vision board and you stare at it and it says, I am a millionaire, or I am with my perfect girl or perfect guy and this is what they look like, and you've got pictures of these perfect people. They are all tapping into our human nature, our desire to get the most out of life with minimal effort. Now, you and I both know, as well as our parents and anyone who's successful in life, with their bodies, with money, with relationships, that is an absolute lie. That 99% of things that you're going to get out of your life will not come from minimal effort. So those books created this huge, huge sale point because they tapped into that. And while they're entertaining and fun, even people who are highlighted in the book, and I write about several of them in my book, they say, well, you know what, they only took a smidgen of the truth of my story.
If you say that positive thinking doesn't change your life, what does?
This is a great question, and it's what we don't want to hear, but I am going to give people the most amazing amount of hope for a different life than what they have right now if they follow what we share. And what I'm going to tell you in a minute, George, it's not just David Essel. We went out and got 6 New York Times bestselling authors who I've interviewed on my radio show. I told them I'm writing this book. I said, hey, if you have any interest whatsoever and you want to share your personal story, I don't want an endorsement. I want you to share a personal story that you went through to prove that positive thinking isn't enough, and it rarely is ever going to change anyone's life. And, George, do you know within 48 hours, all 6 New York Times bestselling authors emailed me back and said, we are in. Thank God someone is going to tell the truth and blow this nonsense out of the water.
Wow.
And so what do we need to do? Well, remember what we were talking about Prince, and many times people who have heavy addictions are surrounded by enablers. So one of the most difficult steps that an addict, an alcoholic, a spending addict, a sex addict has to do is they've got to remove themselves from the enabling group. And they've got to face reality, and they've got to get help from non-biased or unbiased people. And that's one of the keys to creating the success that your listeners want that they don't have, is that we've got to create a plan. And the plan number one is, what am I shying away from that I don't want to face that's going to help me break through and lose this 100 pounds, make $50,000 more a year, find the love of my life, or forgive my partner so we can fall back into love? And that's one of the massive things that all successful people do, including what you had mentioned earlier, who's one of the stars of The Secret that I wrote about in my book, Dr. Joe Vitale, who went from homeless to multimillionaire.
How did that happen?
This is a great story. Dr. Joe Vitale was in Dallas, and he was homeless for a number of years. And this was before the Internet took off. And he got this luckiest break of luckiest breaks, and someone said to him, we have an opportunity for you to work, but it's going to be a lot of hard work. You're a smart guy. You've had some bad breaks. You're homeless, but you're going to get an opportunity here. He went and worked 7 days a week, 14 hours a day. It took him 4 or 5 years to break through, and he became a millionaire. Now, he was already a millionaire when the people from The Secret found him, and they said, hey, what did you do to become a millionaire? And he said, well, one of the things I did was I visualized myself as a millionaire. I visualized checks coming in the mail. So they took that one part of his story and put it in the book, that he went from homeless to multimillionaire by envisioning that he could do it. So when I had him on my radio show, I said, hey, Dr. Joe, listen, I have bought all your books. You are amazing at what you've accomplished in life. And according to this book that you're in that is selling millions of copies, and it's very entertaining, very fun, it says that you went from being homeless to a multimillionaire by your thoughts, by the power of your thoughts. And he said, David, I wish it was true. And then he told me his story that I just shared with you, George. And you know, within the book, I'm going to say we probably have at least 100 stories like this, from people who have recovered from affairs to rebuild their love life, people that have lost 120 pounds, people that have made millions of dollars. There's another homeless to millionaire story I'll tell you in a minute as well. But the surrounding factors that we've culled from all of these people, and then the different client stories that I shared, is that positive thinking is about 20% of our success. The 80% is the stuff that initially, George, we may not want to do.
But you would have to include positive thinking as a portion, as you say, 20%. It's an important ingredient, it sounds like.
Yeah, you know, in the book I share my own, daily rituals, and the first hour of every day is based on meditation, gratitude, prayer, affirmations. I mean, I spend the first hour of my day, doing all positive thinking stuff. But then, honestly, George, I don't even think about it until I'm going to bed at night. And then as I'm going to bed, I'll go through some affirmations and gratitude for the day and that kind of stuff. But and all these people that wrote in the book, when they were sharing stories, oh, my gosh, we're going to have to talk about Scarlett Lewis and forgiveness. But these people said, in order to create this dynamic life that we all want, it's got to be a heck of a lot more than thinking.
I've always talked about the possibility of just positioning yourself to do some incredible things through, as you say, minimal positive thinking, but to be ready, to be prepared. When the door opens, you better be ready. And I've always told people, look, you may want to be the best talk show host in the world, and you might not have that opportunity. But when it does happen, you need to be ready for it, or you're going to fall on your face.
Yes.
And that is and I tell my kids this, whatever they want to do in life, to be prepared for it and be the best at what they can do. Because when that door opens, and a lot of times it will, you need to be ready for it.
George, you just said one of the keys, and Diane Collins, who wrote in our book, she's a New York Times best-selling author, and I don't know if you know her, but you would love her because her New York Times best-selling book is called Do You Quantum Think? And she is a mastermind in the world of quantum thinking, the string theory, all of this wild stuff that's way beyond my capability to think, to comprehend, I should say. And I contacted her after interviewing her, and I said, hey, listen, this is my book, and I know you're really into thinking, and you're into power of thought. And here's someone that could have easily blown me off, George, and said, well, David, you actually can create whatever you want with your mind. And she said, no, I want to be a part of it, and I'm going to tell you why.
And she was with me a couple of years ago, by the way.
Oh, was she really?
Was on.
Yeah. Okay. So in the story that she shared in the book, and this goes hand in hand what you just said about being prepared, when she was thinking about where she wanted to go with her life, and I have a very similar personal story that happened to me this way, she decided that the only way that her books were going to get recognized if she became a media darling, that if she became exceptional as an interviewee for her book. So she went out and she did 400 interviews. Anyone at any time. It didn't matter if it was relevant to her knowledge base or not. And she said when she did that much work, doors started opening.
Yep.
Just what you said, George.
Yep.
But you know how many people want to write a book and then sit back and they're going to wait for their publisher or wait for God or wait for someone to open the doors for them?
You can't do that.
And then they get on your show, if they ever made it to your show, and they're not effective as a guest, and they wonder why their books didn't sell when they were on your show. And then we go back to this whole concept is that they did part of the work, but then they sat back. And that sitting back, not one person that I've ever interviewed, George, or I've coached as a life coach or a recovery coach, there isn't one that ever accomplished great things by thinking and sitting back.
I agree with that. You have to go after it.
Yeah. You know, George, when I was, this is going back 30 plus years ago, I had a mentor, the late Richard Gerson. And I was out of school for about 6 years, and I came to work for him, and he said to me, what do you want to be, Esley? You've got all this energy. You're really gifted and talented, but you don't have a direction. If there could be one thing that you would become, what would it be? And I said, Dr. Gerson, I want to be one of the top motivational speakers in the world. And he looked at me, he goes, how serious are you? I said, I'm dead serious. He said, this is what you need to do. First step, go get your master's degree in sports psychology, exercise physiology, and marketing. Second, you're going to speak 200 times for free. Let's get to work. So he,
and that's a lot of times.
And it is a lot of times, George. And so he helped me find a graduate school. I went back to school. I worked for him full time. I went to school full time. It was a year and a half from heck. It was unbelievable. You know, there was no sleep in that year and a half, but I completed it. Then I went and spoke 200 times. And you know, and he wouldn't let me accept a penny until I had spoken for free 200 times. And he said to me at the end of all this, he said, you are going to thank me, because the minute someone writes a check for $50, $200, or $10,000 for you to be a speaker, they're going to expect you to be the best. And I don't want you going out there and falling on your face.
That's right. Exactly.
You know, George, and this is what we teach in the book. If it's weight loss, if it's freedom from addiction, if it's relationship, if it's money, there's a process. And all of these experts can't be wrong, and they aren't. And they know it. Just what you said, that you tell your kids, they are telling us through this book that I've compiled how to do it correctly. No more wishful thinking, but let's get the success you want.
You have talked about the incredible story of Scarlett Lewis, who lost a son during the Sandy Hook Elementary School tragedy. I can't do what she did, and that was she forgave the killer.
Yeah.
I can't do that.
Yeah.
Now, let's talk about her first, then we'll talk about me.
Okay.
But how could she do that? How could she have the ability to do that?
George, this is one of the most riveting stories, and I'm getting chills right now as I share this with you and your listeners. And, you know, I've told this story 1,000 times since the first time I interviewed Scarlett 3.5 years ago. I think it was about 4 years ago now, believe it or not. The Sandy Hook Elementary School massacre. And
which, by the way, some people still think it never even happened.
Oh, I know. I saw that.
I know.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you what. I know Scarlett personally. I know her very well. It happened, George.
Yep, I believe that too.
You know, here's the most amazing thing. So 8 months after the massacre, she's on my radio show, and I didn't really know how I was going to even approach this topic. And she was willing to do the interview, but I had no idea as a host, how the heck am I going to talk about this?
Yeah, very sensitive. Jeez.
Extremely, George, extremely. And so she come, and I said, Scarlett, I said, first, I'm just going to ask you, you know, I don't even know how to put this. Are you even thinking about forgiving Adam Lanza, the killer? And there was this pause, George, and she said, David, I already have. And I said, Scarlett, we're talking like 9 months ago this happened. I could never forget. I don't think I could. Tell me about it. And she said, well, you know, Jesse was this most precocious, precious 6-year-old little boy you'd ever imagine. Everyone loved him to death. He had energy and passion for life. And he left for school that day just like he always does. And then I get the call in the afternoon, and I go and stand in line for hours, and then I'm pulled aside into this room, and I'm told what happened. And I came home, and I was numb. But it was after about 30 days, I knew that this numbness could continue for the rest of my life. if I didn't do intense work. So I committed 6 straight months of working with all different types of EMDR, tapping, journal writing, and she said I had to get to the rage that I felt. I had to get to the anger. I had to get it and get it out, because if I didn't, it was going to eat me up. And she said, at this point, I have forgiven him. Now, this is 3.5 years ago, George, and I just had her at one of my events about 2 months ago, and I'll tell you what's going on. She said, at this point, I've forgiven him by 75%. And in the mornings when I wake up, if there's anything that comes up and I am thinking about him and how I feel about him, I will stay in that, and I'll give myself a certain amount of time to be angry, to be fitful, and then I move on. So 2 months ago when I had her at my event, my seminar, I said, you 75%, where are you now? She said, David, I'm over 90%.
Amazing.
I said, Scarlett, you've got to tell me and the audience again, how can you be there? And she said, I had to make a decision. Adam Lanza took my son, Jesse, but he's not going to take the rest of my life and my son, JT's. And that's the motivation that I wake up with, to make sure. And now my life is committed to traveling the world and teaching about the power of forgiveness. And let me say one really important thing here, George, for your listeners. Forgiveness isn't about turning the other cheek and forgiving because it's the right thing to do. Forgiveness is going into the depths of hell with your rage and your anger and living in it until you can release it to move through it. But there is no forgiveness if we think we're just going to do it because it's the right thing to do. And let's go back to positive thinking. When she wrote in my book, she said there were many well-meaning people that said to her, I guess God needed another little angel. People think that going to some kind of positive thought is going to help someone in the middle of this outrageous misery. And she said, David, it makes things worse. You have to go into that rage, into that anger, in order to move through it. And she is, George, I want to tell you, of all the people I've met in my life, and I'm in contact with her regularly, she is by far one of the most remarkable people I've ever been introduced to.
I mean, what she did for herself and her own family is remarkable.
Yes. And, I say, I don't know if I could do it.
See, I would go through the rage period, and it would stay there for a while. I mean, I just couldn't forget somebody who did that to a family member or anybody that I know.
You know who else? I don't know him, and I've never interviewed him, but someone who I believe went through a similar process, but it was probably longer. I mean, I've never heard of anyone go through it as quick as Scarlett, but was John Walsh.
Oh, yeah. He went through a tragedy beyond tragedy.
Exactly.
And they found his kid's head.
Yes.
My God.
I know. And for him, and then they did something very similar. Scarlett devoted her life to teaching the power of forgiveness through the right steps, not just by forgiving because it's the right thing to do or turning the other cheek or some nonsense that doesn't work. And Adam Walsh, or John Walsh, his son was Adam.
Son was Adam.
Yeah, John committed his life to making a difference, to go after people that were escaping the law. So they both kind of use that as a healing.
Indeed. David, stay with us. We'll be back with... We're going to take your phone calls this hour with David Essel as we talk about positive thinking will never change your life, but this book will get your views. Maybe you want to share some stories, too. We've got a few more to talk about when we come right back. And welcome back to Coast. Dave Essel with us. David, you know our dear friend Eldon Taylor. He's a great guy.
Oh, my gosh, yes. Eldon, he wrote the foreword to the book and stories in the book, George. He's amazing, isn't he?
Oh, my gosh, he sure is.
Yeah. Well, and, one of the stories that he tells is, in the foreword of the book, as a matter of fact, we were talking about the law of attraction, and, the premise of the law of attraction is what you think about, you attract into your life. And he said that there was this one teacher of the law of attraction, and you'll remember the story. And I believe it was in Arizona or New Mexico that he did this motivational weekend getaway, and they did a sweat lodge, and 2 people died.
That's right. I remember that story.
Remember that?
Yep.
And the gentleman went to jail, and it was just a really, obviously, incredibly sad experience to hear happen. Well, another quote-unquote great teacher of the law of attraction said that the teacher who went to jail for the deaths of the two people must have attracted the deaths with his thought.
And he had been on our show before, too, by the way.
Oh, James Ray?
James Arthur Ray, yeah.
Yep. Yeah, James Ray was the one that this happened to. But it's like, and that's what Eldon was saying, in the foreword to my book, Eldon Taylor. He was saying, come on. We take these things at point blank value when they're not point blank value. It's like positive thinking is wonderful. But, one of the things I wanted to share in my own life for 20 years, George, I got up every morning and said this affirmation, and I write the full story in the book. I am David Essel, a child of God, happy, healthy, and sober, today and every day. And every night for 20 years, I drank myself to sleep. As a motivational speaker, as a coach, as everything. And I was falling victim to the thought that as long as I said the affirmation, I am losing weight, I am sober, I am making $100,000 a year, that's what these books are promoting. And it's absolute nonsense. In 1996, do you remember Maharishi Mahesh Yogi?
Oh, sure do. Beatles, right?
That's right. He's the founder of Transcendental Meditation, and the Beatles, and still to this day, Paul McCartney loves Transcendental Meditation. Well, we had Maharishi on my show in 1996 to celebrate the 40th anniversary of Transcendental Meditation. At the end of the show, a couple weeks later, I'm speaking at a major event. I get off stage, and there's this woman standing there, and she said, Maharishi sent me, and I need to ask you a question. Then I need to get on a flight and go back to the university. And I said, well, what do you mean? She said, I flew in to ask you one question. We sat down, and she said, Maharishi loved the interview, but he wants to know this. What do you remember from the interview? George, if I had Deepak on or Eldon Taylor or the late Wayne Dyer, who I dedicate this book to, I could tell you 10 years later what they told me. But with Maharishi, I couldn't. I said, you know what? I'm looking at her, I go, I don't have a clue. She goes, you must remember one thing. I said, he was filled with joy, a childlike joy. And she looked at me, George, and she said, David, I don't know how you're going to handle this, but the reason you remember that is because you don't have that type of joy. To which I said, the interview's over. Really nice to meet you.
Yeah, you were done, right? Right there.
I'm a national radio host. I'm an author. I live on the beach. You don't know what you're talking about. 3 weeks later, 1996, on a Tuesday at 2:30 in the afternoon, I came out of a 3-day binge to alcohol and cocaine. And I looked in the mirror,
Jesus.
George, and I said, she was right. I have no joy. And I turned my life around and started teaching holistic addiction recovery because of the interview with Maharishi, who must have known there was something I was going to learn from him that I had no idea was coming. So here for 20 years, George, I kept waking up saying, I'm sober, I'm a child of God, all this other kind of, affirmation nonsense. But it took me going into the depths of that despair and getting help, just like we wish Prince would have, at the level that he probably needed it, right?
That's right. Exactly right.
So
good observation.
Positive thinking will not change your life unless it's a miracle. We have to do, George, that which we don't want to do.
I want one more story, then we'll take calls about the woman who lost 120 pounds in a year. How did she do that?
Oh, can we do that right now?
Yeah.
Okay. So this woman, for 30 years, she had carried 120 pounds, and she joined all the clubs, all the famous this and all the famous that, and she could not lose the weight and keep it off. She would lose 40, 50, 60 pounds, and 3 or 4 months later, it's all back. So, and she's up in the Northeast, and I said to her, listen, the conscious mind and the subconscious mind is the problem here. And, George, in the book, we go into huge detail about what the difference between the conscious mind and the subconscious. The conscious mind says, I want to lose weight. The subconscious mind, until we turn it around, says, let's keep doing what we're doing. So it's a saboteur. And I said to her, if you will follow our program and surrender to what we ask you to do, I guarantee you that 12 months from now, you will have lost 120 pounds. But you're going to have to resist the comfort foods, the temptation. I want you to call me. I want you to email me. I want you all over me because we're going to make this work. If we can do it for a year, your subconscious mind will be turned around. It won't sabotage you anymore. and you'll go on. That was over 15 years ago. The 120 pounds came off in 1 year, never to return.
Good job, David. You're one of a kind.
When we do what we'd rather not do, George, no matter what our listeners are facing, no matter what their goal is, we have to do what we don't want to do, and we've got to find people to hold us accountable to change.
How did you find them?
How did I find
these stories? That they come from the authors and those people?
Well, a lot of the stories in the book are my clients.
Aha. Okay.
That I've been, a counselor and a life coach for 25 years now. So a lot of the stories of people that have recovered after affairs, 120 pounds weight loss, people making $250,000 a year with high school education, and they were told their whole life they'll never make any money. These are all our clients. And then we have the Eldon Taylors and the Scarlett Lewises that wanted to write their story in the book, that endorsed the work I do, but their own personal examples.
All right, let's go to the phones as they line up for you. We start by going to Jeff in Albuquerque, New Mexico, west of the Rockies. Hi, Jeff. You're up with us.
Hi, George and David. I just wanted to comment about, the topic of forgiveness, the power of forgiveness.
Sure.
I grew up in a home where my dad was alcoholic and extremely abusive to my mom and my sisters. I confronted him at one time. I think I was about 19 years old, and he was about to basically crack my skull open with a hammer. He was just flailing away, and I told him, I said, Dad, I feel like, you've done a horrible thing to this family, but at the same time, I forgive you. Wow.
And he listened to that.
And you see, I've never seen a grown man since then just crumble into tears.
Wow.
And, I didn't realize, I didn't even think how important this was until maybe 35 years later. And I keep coming back to this. And this is a story I actually share a lot with other friends of mine and even coworkers and stuff, that the power of forgiveness is just so underestimated.
Did he change after that, Jeff?
He did. As a matter of fact, he went to the VA and was part of a group, an AA group, and tried to change. And actually, he did. Quit drinking, although unfortunately at that point in his life he had become diabetic from the heavy drinking, and he only lived about 5 years more after that. And I just remember that I think he just needed to hear that.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, my family had experienced so much pain from all his abuse that they couldn't bring themselves to it. And I think for me, because I came so late in my family, I was the fifth child and I was 9 years younger than my brother. So I kind of came in very late in the family, and I never understood exactly what possessed my dad to drink so much, and his behavior becomes so almost like Jekyll and Hyde in
very erratic
in his manner. But I think I'd have to think that I was born and raised a Catholic. I think that there's something to this idea about having forgiveness and love going hand in hand. And I told him that I loved him, but I didn't like him as a person, when he was drinking.
Yes.
And I know I didn't realize how much it changed me until years later in my ability to forgive other people that had done some really terrible things to me. So
good for you, Jeff.
Jeff, that is a powerful story, and for you to be able to do it at a young age is really quite miraculous.
David, I could forgive most, but there would be a couple episodes I would have a difficult time, as I mentioned. Murder of a loved one, I could forgive someone who may have been drunk and got into a car accident and killed somebody. I mean, eventually I would forgive that. Now, if it was an 8-time DUI person, I might have a different thought about that. But the one thing I would not forget and forgive is pedophilia. I would not give that person another chance.
Yes.
That's just me.
Yes. You know, George, we have these ideas, and until we go into that firestorm, I have very strong opinions of what I could and could not forgive. And then I, experience someone like a Scarlett Lewis, and at least it opens up a corner of my mind. Well, if another human can do it, maybe. I don't know, but maybe.
I'm envious of people like her.
Oh, powerful. You want to talk about strength of the human spirit. But I want to make this, what Jeff was talking about is really so different and powerful in his own right, to be able to look at someone who's abusing you and say, I forgive you. Like, that's almost supernatural. That's just incredible. That's one form, and then Scarlett and what she did is another supernatural form, George. It's incredible that people can have this type of strength, this internal strength to make those decisions and then to do what needs to get done. What Jeff did required a ton of strength, and what Scarlett did and does requires a ton of strength.
Yeah. Let's go to Charles in Baltimore, Maryland. Welcome to the program, Charles. Go ahead.
Yes. How you doing?
Good, Charles.
I like to say, comment on something and make a statement, which I could be wrong, okay?
All right.
And, I like to be corrected on this. But, okay, the kind of forgiveness that he was talking about, which really sounds great, doesn't really work in my view, and I'll explain and why I feel this way. Okay, look at the 60s, and I like to take this down to a real personal level too, but I'll bring up the other side here.
Okay.
Okay, look at the 60s, for example, the Civil Rights Movement. If you listen to some, not all, some black leaders today, they haven't really forgiven us for what has happened to what has happened to them, hundreds of years ago. Okay, because the reason why I say that is you have revisionist history going on in our educational system today. You can have things like Black History Month, but you can't have White History Month. You can have a whole lot of different things like, you get the point.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I like to digress and talk about my personal situation here. And why I feel I haven't forgiven to a degree. Maybe I have and don't realize it, okay? And let me put it to you this way succinctly. The National Federation of the Blind is working, and I'm working with them. I am a member of it, where, and you can look this up on the internet when you get a chance. There's a thing where blind people are allowed to be paid less than the minimum wage. Okay, draw this picture in your mind if you can.
Because they're blind, I guess, right? That's their excuse.
Yes. Well, here's, I'm a victim of this situation.
That's a bunch of bull, too. You know that. You should be paid what everybody else is paid. Right.
And see, we're not. And these sheltered workshops, for example, they're allowed to do this. There's a section 14C of the Fair Labor Standards Act, which was, brought as a lie, stating these back in 1938, that said, for example, and that the blind were less capable of producing and being productive than sighted people, which was a lie then, and it's a lie now. In 1974, for example, I had to work for a quarter an hour. None of our listeners has ever had to do that to my knowledge.
25 cents?
Yep.
What'd you do? Live in some third world country?
Oh, yeah, this was here in Baltimore.
Jeez.
Industries.
That's crazy.
And what I did was, instead of just saying, don't worry about it, I took it upon myself to write my delegates and to send them my pay stubs and say that blind people should be paid, that the blind trainees at blind industries should be paid the same benefits, and the stipend,
Sure.
the same benefits as anybody else.
Well, did you get that changed?
Yeah, I got that changed. But if I would have just turned the other cheek, and I don't know if what Jesus is really advocating here, just don't worry about it. I know God says that, vengeance is his. He will repay, which is probably true. But really, do we really live that in a world and society? No. We take it in our own hands.
All right, let's get a quick comment from David before the break. So, David, here he is. He's blind. He's getting paid 25 cents an hour, and he takes matters in his own hands, and he fights it, and he wins.
And you know what, Charles and George, and I think that's exactly what we need to do, and that would be one of the ways that we move towards forgiveness, is not by accepting it because it's the norm, but by saying this is incorrect. This is not fair, so let me do what I can. And in that process, we can begin to let some of that angst go. When I'm listening to Charles, George, and Charles, I'm sitting thinking of Helen Keller. Like deaf, dumb, and blind, and she becomes a motivational speaker for my Lord's sake, and an unbelievable author. And so to say that someone who has a challenge shouldn't be paid equal to others is absolute nonsense. And Charles, good for you for standing up and fighting for what's right.
Truly remarkable how some people can just pick themselves up and make it happen.
I love it.
But with a minute left, so you did that flip-flop from slow down to where you are now. Are you glad you've made this change?
George, I am more than glad. It has opened up my eyes to how I became a lemming. The story of the lemmings, following the leaders. I became a lemming because some really big names in the world of motivation and personal growth were saying certain things were true.
Yeah.
I was following. And now my work has changed so dramatically. It has been unbelievable. The response, George, is off the wall in a positive way.
Good for you. Do you know Ben Newman at all from St. Louis? He's a motivational speaker.
No, I don't.
He works a lot with sports figures.
Okay.
And takes them into events and stuff. But I want to talk with you about that when we come back, David, if I can. Motivational speaking and how it works to really try to change people's lives. Okay, welcome back. George Noory here with David Essel. It's our final segment here as we talk about positive thinking or the lack of. So I would guess your thoughts on this are somewhat popular in some streams and not in others?
George, that's an understatement. The people who are in my industry who, love reading motivational books and love thinking that if they think a certain way they can attract certain stuff, they have a hard time with this concept, some of them. But what we found is some of the people, like the Eldon Taylors and Scarlett Lewis and Ariel Ford, Natalie Pace, J.J. Virgin, all of these New York Times bestselling authors who are in my industry, these are the leaders, George, and these are the ones that are jumping up and going, thank you, David, for writing this book. So I think, George, everything in life is timing. If we would have written this book 4 years ago, it would have been too soon. But to have these leaders in my industry, in the world of personal growth and self-realization that I just mentioned, say that they want to add their story to my book tells me the time is right. So the resistance, of course there's going to be resistance because, we're saying that if you believe it, you can achieve it isn't true. As a matter of fact, there's a story I tell in the book about one of my favorite books of all time by Napoleon Hill. Think and Grow Rich.
That's right. A huge
I love it.
book.
I still read it every year. And do you know, George, not one time in the book does he ever say you can think and grow rich.
Great title, though, huh?
It's a great marketing title.
Written by someone who didn't read the book.
That's right. But there's not one. Every example he gives, it's very similar to my book. Every example he gives, he talks about people battling their way with the help of others to accomplish huge goals. Our book, George, is a book of hope.
So is it unrealistic, David, to simply sit back and think positively about everything?
It's unrealistic to sit back and think positive and expect your life is going to change. It's totally unrealistic. And that's the thing that really bothered me, that years ago I used to tell people that, George. I really did. And when I said earlier in the show, this book to me is a book of amends in some way, I used to tell people that whatever you believe you can achieve. And I used to do motivational speaking 30 years ago when I started. I was on stages around the world spouting these statements that now we're saying aren't true.
All right, next up, let's go to Ray in Modesto, California on the wild card line. Hey, Ray, go ahead.
Hey, George, great show, great music tonight.
Thank you.
Hey, David, I'm not sure I completely understand your message. I haven't read your book, and just from what I'm hearing, though, you're not necessarily saying that positive thinking is not effective in as much as you're saying that positive thinking in itself is not some kind of magic that will make things happen. It has to be the starting point of what we're doing. I mean, just from a common sense point of view, positive thinking that would lead you to believe that you can do something would get you started towards that endeavor, whereas negative thinking might put you in a position where you'd never try, right?
Ray, what you're saying potentially is true. We're not saying positive thinking is bad, but we're saying it's way overrated. And you can go and read all the positive books you want, go to all the seminars you want, listen to CDs on the way. As a matter of fact, I'll tell you a story. There's a guy, Dr. Bill Tollefson, who for 33 years was a psychotherapist with women who were abused. And he came and took all of the work that I did, and he went through all these courses we teach. He dropped all of his PhD work, and he came on board with starting to take these women through more challenging exercises to help them release their past and to become healthy. And he just put an email on one of my YouTube videos the other day, and he said, David, your work changed my life. Enough of the positive thinking. Ray, it isn't powerful enough. It's only going to account for 20% of our success. So I'm not saying don't think positively. What I'm saying is let's drop it. It's not that powerful. I'm not drop positive thinking, but let's drop it that it's this all-healing type of a thing. It's this magic wand. And, Ray, going back to a statement you made a minute ago about negative thinking, most people that come to work with us with addiction recovery come in with a really negative mindset, and I don't even try to change it. I just say if you do the work that we're asking you to do, your mind will automatically change, and it does. Like, if you do the action steps that you'd rather not do, it's amazing how the mind starts to turn on its own. Does that make sense, Ray?
It does to me.
Yeah.
It does to me.
George, and this is something when people say, well, I was raised in a negative household, I have a negative attitude, maybe it's genetic, and I'll say, I'll tell you what, let's not worry about your attitude. Let's just do those things that you'd rather not. 30, 60, 90 days later, they have a spring in their step, they're accomplishing goals, and they haven't ever even tried to do this magical work.
But you'd rather be positive than negative.
Oh,
right?
my Lord, yes. But if you're not, that doesn't mean you can't be successful.
Let's go to Jim in Detroit, Michigan, east of the Rockies. Hey, Jim, thanks for calling. Go ahead.
Hey, George.
Hey there.
Good to talk with you.
You too. Are you you're in a hospital right now?
I'm in the hospital right now.
What, are you working there or you're a patient?
I'm a patient.
What happened?
Well, April 4th, this is going to be a short story because there's a lot involved here. April 4th, I was diagnosed with type 2 diabetes, and I had a sore on my right foot, and it turned to gangrene.
Oh, my God.
And I had no idea. Well, I have neuropathy in my feet, so I have complete numbness in my feet. I came in here. The doctor emergency came in to see me April 4th, and by 6:30 in the evening, they were doing surgery on me. I've never been in the hospital before since I was born.
Oh, my God, Jim.
Right? So I get out of surgery, and he says, well, we had to take 3 toes off and part of the right of your foot. And the infection was getting worse. So they had to do another surgery on me, and they took all 5 toes off and about half of my right foot.
Oh.
I have absolutely no pain whatsoever, and I think such positive thoughts about it that I have no issue in my head at all with losing half my foot.
Wow.
It's like I'm looking forward to walking again. I'm looking forward to driving again. It's really incredible. So they had to take me in for a 3rd surgery because there were these black lines going up my right leg. I mean, I was in big trouble. So as I'm getting ready to go into this third surgery the day before, which was just the 13th of April, 3 doctors were standing at the end of the bed, and they're looking at it going, oh, my gosh, this is bad. We got to do surgery. And I said, you guys got to do what you got to do. And he says, we may have to take your right leg off. Just below the knee. And I said, well, if you do, I'm going to learn to walk. I'm not going to have an issue with it. And the doctor looked at me, and he says, you are the most positive patient I've ever had. And so now they got into the third surgery, and when I got out, I had prayed about it and meditated about it the day before and asked God to take this poison out of my system. I got into the third surgery, and you know how it is. You go in there, they put you under, next thing you know, you're awake.
That's right. With whatever they did is done.
I woke up, and I said, how'd we do? And he says, best case scenario. And so now I'm going into the doctor, and he's like, oh, my gosh, you're doing good. This is incredible.
Did you keep your leg?
Yeah, I got half of my foot down there. I'm looking at it right now. It's like half the size of the other one.
And Jim, type 2 diabetes is controllable. What happened? How high was your glucose level?
407.
407?
Wow.
When I came in, right now they just checked it a little while ago, and it was 112.
Oh,
that's phenomenal. What are you taking for it? Metformin?
Nothing. Absolute. Well, I'm using insulin.
Yeah.
As far as pain goes, I haven't even had an aspirin yet.
Wow.
Good for you.
It's incredible. I got so many stories.
What hospital are you in? I know Detroit like the back of my hand.
St. John's at 12 Mile and Hoover.
Yep. Good place.
Oh, it's these people are so professional. And it turns out I'm a gunsmith. And my doctor was a customer of mine.
Huh.
And I'm telling you, we get together and we talk about guns, and he just looks at me going,
synchronicity.
How positive you are.
I think, Jim, I love your attitude. More power to you.
Now, you got to bring Jim on some of your events sometimes, David. That's what you need.
And you know the interesting thing is, we'll go back to Scarlett Lewis. Scarlett Lewis is the most positive, most incredible woman after what she's gone through. And so when you do the work, whatever Jim is doing, his prayer, his meditation, keep doing it. For people that aren't, of course, we want you to pray and meditate and think positively, but we also want you to do the hard work.
Absolutely. You have to do the hard work.
Yeah, you do. You really do. George, do we have time for a story about
We sure do.
An affair?
Absolutely.
So I want to go into this relationship stuff because we had a couple come in, and this is about 10 years ago now that I write in the book. And the guy had an affair, and he moved out of his wife said, you need to move out. We've got a couple kids. You have to move out. And he came in to me to start working because he didn't know if he wanted to leave the mistress and go back to his family or go back to his family or just run like the Dickens. And, you know, he was anxious. He was nervous. He was confused. He didn't know what to do. His wife comes in. I was working with him for about a month. His wife comes in and she says, you know what? Everyone tells me to divorce him. He can't even decide if he wants me and the kids. You know, and everyone is telling me to divorce him, and everyone's telling me that he's this and he's that. And so I said, well, let's do some work. So I'm working with them individually. One day the wife comes in and she says, you know what, David, I've listened to enough of the negativity, and I am extremely negative right now. I don't know what to do with my own decision-making skills. So I sent her home for 2 straight weeks with this immense amount of writing, George. She came back in and she said, I said, what would be the most difficult thing for you to do? What would be the hardest thing? She said, would be to accept my husband back into the family. And I said, if that's the most difficult thing, and if you tried it, and if it worked, would it be worth it? And she looked at me and she said, it would be worth it, but there's no guarantees, are there? And I said, no. I said, you know what? More often than not in life, it's that thing that we're avoiding. It's that thing we don't want to do that's going to open the gateway to success. Do you know she came in 2 days later, George, and she sat down in front of me with the conviction like you wouldn't believe and said, David, I'm going to fight for my marriage. Her husband came in the next week, and he said, I don't know what's going on. I've been really indecisive. Do you think she would take me back? I think I'm going to talk to her. I said, you know, I don't know. You guys need to talk. I worked with them for 1 year, George. Over 10 years ago, I get an email from them every Christmas. Their marriage has gotten stronger, but the only reason it did was because they were both willing to work harder than they ever had to reclaim their love. And the other thing I'm going to mention, George, and for every woman out there who's had a boyfriend or a husband that's cheated on them, they're going to hate to hear what I say next, but it's a key point of our work, is that whoever did not cheat, at some point they have to be willing to look at what role might I have played in the dysfunction of my marriage or relationship that allowed my partner, partially responsible for allowing my partner to seek help, love, sex somewhere else. And it was when that woman...
Which is not an excuse.
No, and we're not saying that, that it's the woman's fault that he... But she came in and she said, David, I quit having sex with him for 6 months because I was so resentful of other things he was doing. And I see my role, instead of communicating with him, I just told him I was tired. I told him I have the kids to take care of. I told him you work too much. I've got too much going on, and I'm not in the mood. She said I wasn't in the mood for 6 months, and that was my role.
Michael in Virginia Beach, Virginia. Hey, Michael, welcome to the show.
Thank you, George. I think the problem here is a lack of analytical thinking while we work. But too many people, they decide what they're going to do, they think positively about it, and they start working on it, but they don't analyze what they do while they're doing it so as to make it as good as it can possibly be. So a lot of people believe that just working hard will make them successful. That's the positive thinking lie.
What do you think of that, David?
You know what, Michael and George, it's interesting. If you're working really hard but in the wrong direction, you're not going to create the success you want. People could put 12 hours a day into doing anything, and if it's not the right direction, and that's why, George, in the book we say this. Number one, write down what you want. Number two, write down what you're avoiding to get that. So if you want more money, you want to lose weight, you want a great relationship, you want a closer spiritual path, whatever it is that you want, what are you avoiding? You need to know what you're not willing to do or what you haven't been willing to do. The next thing is that you need an accountability partner, someone who's going to hold your feet to the fire, that's not going to take your excuses, that's not going to enable you to get away with murder. When you say, I really want to double my income, or I really want to lose 100 pounds, or I really want to do this, we cannot rely on our own willpower, George, which is a big part of the book. Every success story, people relate to having someone to push them. It might be a professional coach. It might be a minister. It might be a personal trainer. It could be a best friend, but they can't be an enabler. And if we follow these, along with creating a plan, George, an action plan, 5 days a week, that from 8 at night until 9 at night, I'm going to do A, B, C, D, E, Monday through Friday, we will see a totally different existence in 12 months.
Good point. And David, give out your websites, will you?
Oh, yeah. TalkDavid.com. It's just talk, T-A-L-K, David.com. George, all of our listeners can get Chapter 1 for free of our new book, Positive Thinking Will Never Change Your Life, The Myth of Positive Thinking, The Reality of Success. Everyone can get Chapter 1 at TalkDavid.com, absolutely free.
That's smart, David, because once you read Chapter 1, you want to read Chapter 2.
And 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, George.
Next up, Donna in Iowa. Let's squeeze you in here, Donna. We've got about a minute or so for you. Go ahead.
No, thank you. Thank you so much for taking my call.
Sure.
I just felt the need to call. I am a recovering alcoholic. I've been sober. It'll be 13 days to 20th of this month.
Keep going.
13 years.
13 years. 13 days is still good if you're starting, but 13 years is great.
13 years. And I guess I wanted to agree with you when you say that positive thinking is a good start. But like you said, I had someone, it was my mother, to hold my feet to the fire, but she also gave me that helping hand up, and I just busted my butt, and within a year and a half had found myself in a home and that fell apart. And I guess I wanted to touch on the rage part of it because I had just lost the lawsuit with the house that was just so wrong. And when it really touched something in me when you said that you had to embrace that anger and just walk through the hell of that anger to come out the other end.
Yeah.
And I guess I just wanted to say thank you, because it just kind of gave me that nudge again, because it's like starting all over again.
Good for you.
Donna, go right into the teeth of the tiger, right?
You realize, David, how many people you've helped in
George,
your career?
thank you. Over 30 years, it's been remarkable, and I'm now on such a path with this new understanding, something much greater. I understand life at a much deeper level than I did, and we know that getting the collaborators, people like you too, George, that help us with this message is going to touch so many more people.
Indeed. David, you take care of yourself. Enjoy the rest of your Sunday night, okay?
Yes. Thank you, George.
David Essel. Up next, we're going to talk about the electric universe with David Talbot and Wallace Thornhill. Both of them have been on the program with me before, and we've got them together when we come back on Coast to Coast AM. And here's our final emerging artist. Lieutenant Daniel Hyde died in March of 2009 in Iraq. He was 24 years old. He's from Modesto, California. The artist is Night and Fog. The song is called First Lieutenant Daniel Hyde. Love's a little like electricity, isn't it? Well, in a moment, we're going to talk about the electric universe. David Talbot and Wallace Thornhill back on Coast to Coast with me, and we will talk about some incredible things that are going on in space in a moment on Coast to Coast AM. And welcome back to Coast. George Noory with you. We're going to introduce two great guests for you. First of all, David Talbot. David is a comparative mythologist. He's devoted a number of years to examining the origins of ancient beliefs, symbolic traditions as well. He's the author of the Saturn myth and co-author with Wallace Thornhill of the Thunderbolts of the Gods. We talked about that a couple of years ago. His construction of the ancient sky was the subject of a featured documentary called Remembering the End of the World. Let's say hi to David Talbot. David, welcome back.
Yes, sir, George. Good to be back. Thank you.
Me too. Looking forward to this. And, of course, Wallace Thornhill is an Australian physicist. His long investigation of the electric universe offers a revolutionary view of the solar system's history, the nature of the sun. He's the co-author, as I just mentioned, with David on Thunderbolts of the Gods and the Electric Universe. And that book will be coming out June 1st, I believe. Wallace, good to have you back with us.
Thanks very much, George.
And here we go. So, Wallace, tell us, first of all, when we say the electric universe, what are we talking about?
Well, it seems to have been a remarkable oversight that, we use electricity for almost everything in our daily lives, and yet we ignore it when it comes to the workings of the universe. And we know that nature never does things the hard way. So if we find electricity to be so extremely useful, you would imagine that nature has done the same. So the work that I've been doing is looking at all of the observations over decades and centuries and David Talbot's reconstruction of what happened in the dimly remembered past. And I've found that you can explain all of it simply by introducing electrical energy.
And, David, how far back do we go here when we talk about the electric universe?
Now, are you asking me how far back we go to the point at which Wall and I converged with respect to our life's work and so on? I mean, that was like 15 years ago.
Well, let's go back even further, though, with this electric universe. I got to believe when the universe started, and there's a big debate about that, that this electric universe was always the way it was, wasn't it?
Well, the way it was and what human beings thought they were seeing would be two different things. Now, my own life's work, this is like over 40-plus years of investigating the origins of ancient traditions and so on. That work convinced me that things were seen in the ancient sky that aren't seen today. So the sky has changed. Unraveling what that could possibly mean was the purpose of my work for many years. It culminated initially in the publication of a book called The Saturn Myth, published by Doubleday, when Doubleday was the biggest publisher in the world. And that began a process of people coming into an interest in planetary history and planetary catastrophe. Sometime later, I converged with Walt Thornhill, and it became clear that my reconstruction of things seen in the ancient sky in a much different planetary system converged very well with Walt Thornhill's electric universe investigations. So that gave us a convergence or a partnership, a combination of understanding the human experiences of the past and then seeing these experiences in terms of the electric universe paradigm today. So it's a very, very nice, convenient partnership that we've developed covering an interdisciplinary subject. Planetary catastrophe in the past. It's the way it shows up in the planet or on the planetary surfaces today, and the way it was experienced by human beings in the past and translated into world mythology.
And David, when you talk about planetary catastrophes, what are you talking about here?
Well, planets moving on different courses than we observe the bodies today. We see a very orderly solar system today. It was only a few thousand years ago. Let's just pull 5,000 years out of the hat because the chronologies are not clear once you get back beyond a few hundred years. But there was a period of planetary upheaval that helped to project human imagination into civilized consciousness. In other words, what was on the minds of the builders of the first civilizations were planetary catastrophes. The roles of the planets close to the Earth, lightning bolts, flying between planets.
Huge, too.
Upheaval on Earth up to a global scale. Planets so close to the Earth that they appeared in the sky as towering forms. And these planets are named. We can identify the role of Mars as this towering warrior figure form. We can identify Venus as this prototype of the mother goddess, the lovely figure in the sky transformed into the raging goddess, wreaking havoc on the world. The planet Saturn as the primeval sun god. These powers are named in the birthplace of astronomy in ancient Mesopotamia. And nothing about the ancient images of these planets fits anything that we observe today in planetary behavior. So that's the heart of the mystery. Is it possible to actually reconstruct what was seen by taking more seriously the ancient languages, their pictures, the images carved on stone, their sacred texts describing overwhelming catastrophe, the roles of particular named planets in these events? All of this can contribute to a reformulation of our picture of the ancient cultures if we will give that serious attention to the literal meanings of words and symbols.
And Wallace, has the universe always been as violent as it was in the start? Did it start violent, and it is now?
Well, we really don't know. This is the thing. We make up stories about the past that suit, in particular, the mathematicians who like to be able to retro-calculate. But you have to realize that nobody was there to witness the events that David was talking about. Those that were tried desperately to let succeeding generations know about it through the monumental works they did. But the story of the formation of the solar system as we see it today had nothing to do with the formation of the universe. Nobody knows how that started, right, despite what Big Bang theorists tell us.
Well, we'll talk about that too, Wallace, because that still confuses me.
Yeah. So the situation we see today, you can't just retro-calculate into the past and say, 100,000 years ago the planets were here and this is what you would see in the sky. That's pure supposition and speculation. The evidence that has been amassed by the mytho-historians like David and Eduardo Cardona and Ev Cochrane and some others just shows that nothing fits if you do that. In fact, when you go to the earliest civilizations like the Australian Aborigines, their recollections of what happened just fit so well, and the things that they talked about in their so-called dream time can all be understood in terms of the information we've got from the other ancient civilizations.
It's pretty remarkable.
It's global, and it all fits together, and it makes a coherent story. The problem for scientists is to get their heads around the fact that we really don't understand some things that they think they know right now.
Which leads us to the question about the Big Bang, and of course the taking spirituality out of it, because I think that is an easy reason to make excuses of what happened.
Yes, that's true. In fact, it really is a reconstruction of the biblical story, complete with a miracle at the beginning. And the point is that astronomers ignore evidence which goes against the Big Bang. There is no research allowed on an alternative. Even the Institute for Electrical and Electronic Engineers, which is one of the biggest professional organizations in the world, recognizes plasma cosmology, which is at odds with the Big Bang. But you won't see that taught in any university.
Yeah, I not being a physicist or a scientist, but I just don't get my handle on a Big Bang. I can't comprehend something exploding, banging, to jumpstart everything. And then...
That's not surprising. I mean, it's like throwing a ball into the air and then having it accelerate away from you upwards. It just doesn't fit anything that we know or experience. But the problem, I think, boils down to the way we teach kids these days. You're not given alternatives to look at, but there were alternatives 100 years ago, and a lot of the arguments against what we now believe were very good, and they should be presented to students and let them think about it. But instead of that, they're given all of these facts, so-called, and equations, and they have to go away and memorize them, and those that remember them best get rewarded and the others don't. That's not the way to teach kids. You have to challenge them with ideas and let them think for themselves.
I mean, is it possible, Wallace, that the universe was always here? And that
That's as far as we can tell. The work of Dr. Halton Arp, who was a well-known professional astronomer, in fact, his name pops up all the time in relation to the names of galaxies and so on. He showed definitively that the assumption that actually is the very basis of the Big Bang, that is that redshift, that is the stretching of light from the blue end to the red end of the spectrum, is all due to the recession, something moving away, like a train whistle dropping in pitch as it races past you. He showed that even Hubble himself didn't believe that the expanding universe was the right answer. He felt there was something we were missing. Halton Arp proved that Hubble was right. And that means that based on Halton Arp's work, that the universe is not expanding. It appears relatively static. But that introduced a problem, because if that's the case, why isn't everything falling in together? Because gravity is supposed to suck everything in.
Right.
And so Halton Arp himself felt that we really did not understand gravity. And it's only in recent years that I've been able to piece together the fact that gravity is short-range attractive and long-range repulsive. But because we're based on the Earth, we've always thought that what we experience on Earth is universal. We have a bad habit of transferring our experience on Earth and saying it's universal, when there's no evidence for that.
See, when I think of gravity, I think of something pulling on something else. And
that's true. If you're up close, it's like two magnets. You can hold them so that they're opposing poles are facing one another, and you can feel that tug towards one another. But just imagine if you turn one magnet around so that the same poles are facing each other, and then you will feel the repulsion. Well, gravity is the same kind of force in the electrical model, so that if you're up close to an object, all of the atoms in your body are attracted towards the body that you happen to be living on, the Earth.
So when you look at...
But if you move away beyond the sphere of influence of the Earth, then you're under the influence of the sun. But what happens if you get out into space beyond Pluto, beyond the sun's influence? Then you are under the influence of all the matter in the rest of the universe, including the galaxy. And that, as Halton Arp has shown, is actually repulsive. Things don't collide. They tend to avoid one another. And this comes back to this idea of the solar system being quite different in the past. People would say, well, didn't objects collide with one another? No, they didn't. They would come close and they would repel one another and also exchange thunderbolts of the gods, as they were called, in the process. And that also helped to establish order. So this is one of the fundamental aspects of the electric universe that fits with David Talbot's work.
And one more question, Wallace, about this. With the, billions of galaxies in the universe, why aren't they just falling? I mean, they're just all there in place.
That's right, and this is where Halton Arp himself said that there must be some aspect of gravity which is repulsive. In other words, objects do not fall towards one another, they tend to avoid one another. And that makes a whole lot of sense, because then you have a universe that's in balance.
That's right.
The Big Bang Theory is totally out of balance, because you need an explosion in the beginning to separate everything, and then at some point in the future everything is going to either fall back in again, and you have a big crunch, as they call it, or it's going to expand forever and everything will fizzle out into the blackness, which is a pretty dismal sort of a prospect.
Well, David, let's bring you in as the mythologist here and get your thoughts on why everything seems to be balanced.
Well, actually, you know what, George, I don't know if I've ever considered the question quite in that way, but what we do know is that the early stargazers and sky worshippers perceived the sky in completely different ways than we perceive it today. Now, we see planets, we see bodies, planets and moons moving on highly regular courses. Why is that picture of planetary stability and regularity so contrary to the experiences in an earlier time, a few thousand years ago, where nothing was feared more universally than the motions of planets? Nothing was observed more carefully than the motions of planets out of the fear of a return of doomsday. Well, this whole connection of planetary behavior to doomsday anxiety is completely nonsensical in our time. But if you can put yourself into the vantage point of those who experienced planetary catastrophe, you begin to see that their descriptions of the cosmic players, a great comet Venus, a primeval sun god Saturn, a great warrior figure Mars, these ideas about the planets are very specific and they're essentially global.
You think Velikovsky was right?
Well, I had a special interest in Velikovsky, which actually, George, got me into my life's work. It goes back many years, but I published a 10-issue series on Velikovsky that remains today. It published from 1972 to 1974. It today remains the most definitive coverage of the science and the history of Velikovsky's contribution. And yes, the planet Venus was, a few thousand years ago, a spectacular comet. It was feared around the world. The story of the comet Venus can be reconstructed in great detail just using the points of agreement between the different cultures. The comet Venus is a gateway for us into an ancient world that has no similarity to our world, our sky, today. So we consider the study of the comet Venus and the study of other planets in their ancient identities to give us a radically new perspective on the ancient world, that the stargazers of ancient times had real perils to deal with. And in their defensive measures, collectively, their magical practices and so on, nothing was more important to them than anticipating catastrophe.
Wallace, what do you think? Venus, a captured comet?
Yes, the thing about comets is that they're generally regarded as leftovers from the formation of the solar system. But
right.
that, too, is one of these once upon a time, long, long ago, fairy stories which suit mathematicians because, of course, they can retrocalculate back to the beginning, or so they think.
All right, well, both of you stay with us. We're going to take this quick break, then we're going to come back and talk more about the electric universe. And we'll get into just what it means to have an electric universe, because even the body, our bodies, are electric as well. Now, don't forget, you can also like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter. We send out little remarks all the time. Major announcement coming up for Coast Insiders tomorrow. And for those of you who've been thinking about becoming a Coast Insider, wait till you hear what we have to say. And also, those of you who want to email me anytime, any day, it's george@coasttocoastam.com. Don't touch your dial. We'll be right back with David Talbot and Wallace Thornhill as we talk about the electric universe. Okay, welcome back. David Talbot with us, Wallace Thornhill as well. David, your thoughts on the electric universe. And the book comes out in about a month, right?
No, I don't. The book I think that you're referring to was The Electric Universe, and that's actually been out for some time, George. What we have in just over a month is a conference. And it may be that we got our dates and
mixed
titles
up.
confused here, but
yep.
We have a conference coming up in Phoenix. It's in the Electric Universe Conference, our fifth annual conference. We get a very inspired group coming into these events. And, of course, Wal Thornhill will be a featured speaker at that event. I'll be speaking, and we've got a dozen other premier speakers who will be appearing at our conference in Phoenix on the 17th to 19th of June.
And that's on your website?
Yeah, and I would urge people to check out thunderbolts.info. That's thunderbolts.info. That's the Thunderbolts Project website, and everything that you would want to know about the conference, about DVDs and special videos, and we're very active on the internet these days with video productions and other internet presentations of the electric universe, with lots of updated material coming out of the space age, coming out of new investigations and extended investigations of the human past and the role of catastrophe in shaping human imagination at the birth of the early cultures.
Now, let me ask you this, David, and I'll ask you too, Wallace. The fact that this is an electric universe, David, in your opinion, what does that mean? What does that mean to us?
Well, I think it means maybe more than we would naturally imagine, because we do not normally think in terms of the electrical underpinnings of the natural world. And Wal Thornhill is, of course, the person to talk about the way this shows up in things that we observe going on in space and in the electricity of life and so on. But if I am asked myself about the meaning of the electric universe, what continually comes to mind for me is the idea of connectivity. And this is a very meaningful human concept, because a world that has no connectivity is fundamentally meaningless, and a human being cannot tolerate meaninglessness. So a connected world offers us a sense of connection that gives meaning and a sense of purpose, a sense of something worth investigating, connections between human beings that may not show up at the level of let's say, of human division and war and all of the things that pit one human being against another. But as our investigations actually look more deeply at the electricity of life, and we see that there is a quality to every human life. There is a nature of human consciousness and human awareness that every human being has in common with every other human being. There is a principle of connectivity then that is very close to the heart of the electric universe movement, because this movement has come increasingly to accent the nature of connectivity. That's connectivity across the cosmos, connectivity between planets and planetary relationships to the sun, and of course the connectivity that comes out of the electricity of life, and just emphasizes to us that there is something that unites all human beings. It is essential to human identity, and it is connectivity.
Okay, and your thoughts on that, Wallace? The electric universe. Tell me the significance of that.
Well, I think David hit on the essential fact of the electric universe, and that is that it involves the electrical connection between all matter in the universe, and that connection is far faster than the speed of light. On our scale, it's instantaneous. Now, quantum experiments in physics have shown this. They call it entanglement or spooky action at a distance. And the reason that it's given these sort of wishy-washy names is that nobody understands it yet, because nobody can consider the idea that the force of the electrical force between all charged matter operates instantly. But when you think about it, this instantaneous connection is required both in the gravitational force between the sun and the earth and the planets. If that weren't so, the whole system would fly apart, because the sun wouldn't know where the earth was at any instant, and the earth wouldn't know where the sun was, and the effect is like a slingshot.
Mm-hmm.
And when it comes to living systems, you could not control all of the trillions of chemical reactions and activity inside a living creature every second if you had to wait for signals to travel along nerves or even at the speed of light. It would still be too slow to coordinate everything so that you have a functioning, conscious, living creature.
Wallace, Nikola Tesla got it. He understood that the universe was electrical, because
yes, he did.
Everything he was trying to invent was going to tap into that.
That's right. He also rubbished the Big Bang.
Yes. Now I know why we liked him.
That's right. Yes, there have been a number of pioneers for over several centuries. Faraday was another one who intuited that electricity was the fundamental force and was extremely important, and that when we understood it, we would understand gravity and much more besides.
Could we literally be able to pull electricity out of the universe, out of the atmosphere, and have free electricity, as Tesla probably wanted to do?
It's a little difficult because given the huge volume of the universe, I mean, we can't imagine it, the empty space out there. When I say empty, it's not actually empty, but to collect that electricity, you require something the size of a planet or a star. But there are other possibilities, you see. Once you understand this instantaneous interaction of matter, you begin to understand particle physics and nuclear fusion, all of these things, and you begin to understand that maybe it's possible much more easily than we thought. And, of course, there's been a lot of people working over the years on cold fusion and what's now called warm fusion, and it's my firm belief now that that is the way of the future, that we will find out how to harness nuclear energy in a harmless fashion and without all the drama that's required.
And clean, too, right?
Expense.
A very clean energy, isn't it?
Yes, yes.
Well, I look forward to the day that we do that. I think we're close to that. I'm not sure they want to talk about it, but I think we're close to it, don't you?
I hope so, and I think there are some scientists who are giving it a serious thought.
All right, David, so as you look at the universe today, is it still changing?
Well, George, the universe is no doubt changing in ways that we don't even imagine today, and yet there is this underlying stability that we experience in our own cosmic neighborhood that poses an enigma for us, because our early ancestors were obsessed with catastrophe, and all we see is predictable motions of planets and moons. So predictable that it appears that with a computer we could retrocalculate the positions of the planets thousands of years ago. And in fact, scientists do that, and they express great confidence that those positions of the planets that they project back to 2000 BC, 3000 BC, are spot on, that this solar system is that regular and that stable. Well, how then could we ever explain that the planet Venus appeared in the sky as a terrifying comet, and that this comet image was recorded around the world? In fact, in every ancient culture, the hieroglyphs, the symbols, the language of the comet was attached to the planet Venus. That's a mystery that is just off the map in modern times. Yet we've examined that story of the comet Venus meticulously, and we see that it is a highly integral story, and it is so fully unified, the details have to be taken seriously. And that story of the comet Venus, this lovely planet becoming a terrifying power in the sky. This is the beautiful goddess, the goddess of love and light, that is transformed into the angry goddess, the hag or witch, the terrible goddess. This is a global theme. Nobody disputes that this is a worldwide image of the mother goddess. But where did that imagery come from? Was it just completely unrelated to anything actually experienced? Or can we go into that imagery of the mother goddess as the planet Venus becoming the terrible goddess, and actually see a story so coherent, so connected in its parts, and so unified that we have to take it seriously? So that's where we have gone with life's work, examining the history of ancient ideas about planets, including Venus as the great comet. Venus was the prototype of comets. It was the preeminent example, the great comet.
How did it get captured, David?
Well, that would be for Walt to talk about, but I'm sure that it has to do with electricity, George.
Wallace, how did Venus, here's it's zooming around, and I assume it came around every certain amount of years. How did it get captured?
Well, the very process of discharging material into space in the form of a comet's tail is part of the capture process. In fact, it's a signature of capture, because that is an electrical discharge phenomenon. And when you alter the charge on a body, it acts to change its mass and its gravitational connection to the sun. And it does it in such a way that every time it encounters a planet like the Earth or Mars, and there's a discharge between the two planets will move apart and try and space their orbits so that they no longer interfere. So today we have Venus with what's actually been called by astronomers a cometary magnetosphere, in other words, an invisible comet's tail, which tickles the Earth when the two planets line up with the sun. And the same goes for Mars. Mars gets tickled by the Earth's magnetosphere, and that's a tiny electric current that flows between the planets. But when the planets were in the process of being captured, those discharges were powerful and destructive, and also they tended to move the planets apart as fast as possible to prevent further interference. For that reason, we managed to survive these catastrophes.
Are things stable now in our solar system?
Yes, I think to have what happened then happen again the sun would have to capture another substantial planetary-sized body. And they're out there, they're floating around. The infrared telescopes in space picking up brown dwarf stars close to the solar system. When I say close, still quite some distance away. But that's the kind of thing that happened that started all of these catastrophes in the solar system, because the process of capture is one of all of the bodies having to readjust themselves to a new order, and that doesn't take long, as it turns out, because these electrical exchanges space everything apart and reestablishes order. There is absolutely no way a gravitational system can do that. In fact, a gravitational system is inherently unstable.
And David, let me ask you this then. In terms of life, why is it so unique to good old planet Earth?
Well, it does seem rather miraculous, and I don't know if anybody can actually answer the question from the vantage point of cosmic intelligence. How does it happen that it appears that things evolved so intelligently? And when I look back across a few thousand years to the kinds of things that occurred in ancient times, I just marvel at how we avoided total devastation. The planets
we lucked out.
We either lucked out, or there is something more fundamentally intelligent at work that we haven't come adequately to.
That's an interesting twist.
And I actually kind of go for that there is an inherent intelligence within the universe, no matter how crazy and disorganized it looked. I can do that, but I don't publicly. I don't use a spiritual language in my public discourse, because we are a broad interdisciplinary movement that does not assert any philosophical or religious persuasion. So this is very important to us, because the interdisciplinary nature of the electric universe does not recommend a particular religious or philosophical view, and that's what we're studying. I have a private life, needless to say, and it takes me into other subjects. So I have an interest in what is a meaningful life, what is a meaningful picture of the world, but I don't, as a rule, make it a part of our public discourse.
But do you believe the fact that there is some kind of method behind it, intelligence behind it? Can you call it a god?
I can.
Yeah.
I don't ask other people to join us in any discourse about the spiritual realm, or the nature of God, the nature of human identity, and these things. Every human being is always free to examine his own identity internally, and to see what it is that connects him to other people, and just in standing back and observing the nature of life and the nature of our connection, we do move our experience and our sense of life toward an increasing sense of connection with other people. And that's the nature of the evolution of human culture, I would say. I mean, we came to realize the principle of equality, but how many thousands of years did it take before we actually recognized the violation of that principle in the subjugation of other peoples and in slavery and so on? What occurs is there is a recognition of the inviolate character of life and the essential universal identity of every human being. As that evolves over time, as it becomes more clear, crystal clear to a human being, he will not tolerate the subjugation of other peoples. He will not tolerate slavery. He demands respect for every life. This is the nature of the evolution of human consciousness, I'd say. And within the electric universe community, this is a given, but we don't make that our message to the public as part of the electric universe community. We let people come in as atheists. They come in as ministers. They come in under every philosophical persuasion known to man, and they can feel comfortable that we're exploring the role of the electric force.
We're going to come back and take phone calls. Okay, put your science hats on, because we're going to take your questions for David Talbot and Wallace Thornhill as we talk about the electric universe right here on Coast to Coast AM. Okay, welcome back to Coast to Coast. George Noory with you, along with two of our guests, David Talbot, Wallace Thornhill, and your calls. David, your thoughts on intelligent life in the universe, yes or no?
I can only assume that there is a great deal of intelligent life in the universe, but I can't argue for that position. It just does not seem like a very meaningful world if we're
without
alone here.
It
just doesn't seem even plausible to me to imagine all of the intelligence that went into the universe to create the sense of harmony that you pick up just by observing things in space and so on. And that all of this was just
a fluke.
A fluke that we landed here on Earth and there's nothing else out there. It doesn't add up to me personally. This is a very subjective opinion, of course. So I don't argue with people on that subject, but I know that every human being looking out at the cosmos must have some sense of connection to all of the universe, to the universe as a whole, let's say, and I certainly experienced that, and even those scientists such as, let's say, Carl Sagan, for example, who marveled at the beauties of the universe and completely resisted any spiritual interpretation of what he saw, but he continually marveled at the wonder and the extravagant beauty of the universe. When I experience that, I cannot just see particles and empty space and nothing more, which is a very common idea in the sciences today, that is the substructure of the natural world, particles and empty space and nothing more. I've never in my life, not since childhood, have I been able to accept that picture of the natural world.
Your thoughts on that, Wallace, too? Intelligent life out there?
Yes, I think the electric universe shows that it's absolutely necessary. When you look back at the geological record, you see that there were mass extinctions and then new animals sprang up in the new environment. To do that requires that the information is already out there in the universe about what sort of life form will exist under these circumstances. And if you go to the bottom of the ocean, near a volcanic vent, you'll find life forms down there, which all suggests to me that the universe is just awash with information which is necessary for life to exist wherever it can find a niche.
All right, well, let's go take some phone calls now. Let's pick it up by going to Clint, truck driving in New Jersey. Welcome to the program, Clint. Go ahead.
Hi, George and guests. I'm fascinated by the gravity, light, and electric connection. I would love to have somebody explain gravity in layman's terms. And also, I love your debunking the Big Bang Theory. On free energy, the integral fast reactor, I think you had Tom Blees on there.
Yeah.
And it's a safe reactor that will use up all the spent fuel rods, et cetera, et cetera. But my big question for your guest tonight is, if you had a long wire and hooked it to the North and South Pole, wouldn't you be able to get free energy from that wire?
That's an interesting take. Who wants that? We already have, in effect, that kind of connection in the ionosphere of the Earth, and we know that electric currents rotate in a ring around the Earth, and that's because the magnetic field forces the current to take that path. But I don't think that's the way to go to get free energy, so to speak. In fact, my view is that energy is held inside all atoms, all matter, and it is easier to get out than anyone at present thinks. Once we can do that, then we will find ways of getting energy out of water, out of hydrogen, out of the things that we have in abundance, and do it in a way which doesn't require the idea that we have to do things like the sun, because the electric universe shows that we don't understand the sun either and the way it produces energy.
Without gravity, would we be up a creek?
We certainly would. Yes, gravity is one of the subtle forces in the universe, and it actually ties in at a biological level too, because it's the same kind of connection that occurs in the natural therapies. They have this idea of subtle energy. Well, there is a subtle energy, and it's this connection between all atoms, all living matter, and it also has, I think, great significance in trying to understand consciousness, memory, and the brain.
Okay, let's go back for more calls. We go to Robert in Baltimore, Maryland now. Robert, welcome to the program. You're up with us.
Hello, George.
Hey.
Gentlemen, it seems to me there's an inconsistency in your using the word electric for your universe, because, as you said earlier, you don't want to consider the term spiritual or anything religious-oriented. However, the term electric is associated very much with electric fields, such as Maxwell defines in his equations of both magnetic and electric fields. And that is very much subject to the time constraints of the traveling of the waves in space, which is inconsistent with what you're talking about, where you have more of a quantum effect of not having a time delay, where things are tied together in a timeless way. So it seems like you're using the wrong term. The term electric, maybe you should find another term like a quantum universe.
I think the word quantum has been misused both by scientists and by so-called New Age people. It is the electric force. That's all there is. The difference between light and those electromagnetism is that it's a wave disturbance. It's transverse wave disturbance, like the waves on the surface of a pond. And as you know, a wave takes time to move through that medium. The electric force, though, is rather like a daisy chain. It's like a rope. You pull on a rope and you feel it practically instantly. Whereas if you wave the rope, the person on the other end, it takes some time for the wave to arrive at them. And that's the analogy I would use.
With gravity out there, and again, without it, would everything be still in order?
No, because even though we talked about electrical interactions between planets and so on, establishing order, it establishes order by modifying the gravitational force, modifies the mass and therefore the gravitational force. So gravity is essential for the clockwork-like activity of the solar system.
So for it to work, it had to be there.
Understanding it in electrical terms rather than just using the word gravity, which nobody understands. You then talk about a model for it in electrical terms, which the engineers can understand and maybe make something interesting out of it, like anti-gravity.
So back to the Big Bang for a moment, or the lack of. What do you think happened, Wallace?
No one knows. And Halton Arp said, that all you can see when you look out there and you look at it through the lens that he was using, everything's quite happily coexisting without crashing into one another or falling together, that it is in equilibrium. So he said the universe is of unknown age and unknown extent.
My mother used to tell me about God, and she would always say, always was, always will be. Kind of sounds like the universe, doesn't it?
Yes, it does.
Really? Wallace, David, chime in here.
Well, I'm not sure where to go with that one, because that's at the level of the biggest picture questions, George. And
moms are that way too, aren't they? They're good at.
Moms would be that way, and many people are clamoring today for answers to the deepest questions that a human being can ask. And so it seems almost like an unfair position that we take when we resist providing answers for people to the biggest questions. The reason for that is that the electric universe movement is all-encompassing. And when you are inviting into a study of the electric force in the natural world, you don't do yourself any favors by advancing philosophical, spiritual, or religious positions. I personally hold to, and have virtually all my life, held to a fundamentally spiritual interpretation of what a human being is. I don't generally talk about that publicly at our conferences. I avoid it altogether. But in private conversation, I am endlessly engaged in discourses with people as to the spiritual nature of human beings, the nature of the spiritual connection, and what is happening in the world as human beings are being forced by events to confront all of the divisive forces that have kept human beings in a state of war against each other. So that's a personal conversation, and I tend to feel anything that asks people coming into the electric universe to hold a spiritual interpretation of life or of human identity would dishonor the underlying principle that we hold to, that we do not require any philosophical or religious or spiritual position in order to join us in an examination of the electric force and the way it reveals itself to us in the natural world. And that is our life purpose, you might say. The rest of it belongs to our personal lives and our personal beliefs.
Could the electric universe be contributing to climate change?
I think the electric universe takes the position that the climate changes naturally.
Yeah.
And that we just have to get used to it.
It's a cycle.
That mankind has very little influence. We talk about climate experts who all agree, but there's no such thing as consensus science. As Michael Crichton pointed out in a famous lecture of his, he says, if it's consensus, it ain't science. And if it's science, it ain't consensus. And yet that's what we've got. You have to remember that the climate scientists themselves rely on information from their peers in other disciplines, and because they're all specialists, the specialists think they know certain things, and the things that they get wrong, they then mislead experts in other fields. Now, the climate scientists have no idea of the electrical energy that's input into our weather systems. There are a few people around the world, a few scientists who are looking into it and having more success, I think, in predicting wild weather and so on, and even earthquakes. We're looking into that as well. But to say that all climate experts say that we're heading for global warming is pretty much meaningless.
Let's go to Zorro in Escondido, California, west of the Rockies. Hey, Zorro, go ahead.
Gentlemen, it's a pleasure to be on the show. Good morning. How are you?
Morning. I hope you are well, too.
Oh, very well. Distinguished guests, quick comment and short question,
sure.
And then a bigger question. As you gentlemen have been devoting your efforts and thinking towards knowing the origin of the universe and whatnot, and in this case, the electric universe and issues related to that, I truly believe that human beings will never be able to understand the origin of the universe. That's just my personal perspective. Hopefully that will change in the future, but it just seems, though, that we don't have the language at this point in our history to envelop and couch the understanding of the ultimate question of the origin of the universe and things related to it. But hopefully things will change. I hope we live long enough to maybe experience that. Short question is people out there who claim that they do know it. I don't believe it, but I guess the larger question is this. Do you gentlemen think that we will be able to develop language, terms, visuals, whatever we want to call the communication device, to allow us all to truly understand the origin of the universe? Is that something within our fingertips, our grasp? Can we actually do that like within the next 20 years or so?
That is an interesting, perplexing question. Wallace, I'll give that to you.
Yep. My view is that, and I follow the radio astronomer Jared Vasseur in this, that who are we in our arrogance to think that we will have the answer to the origin of the universe within a microsecond of asking the question? Because when you look at the history of mankind and our brief history of science, it is arrogant to think that we even can ask the right questions. I think the electric universe helps us ask better questions, but as to whether we'll ever figure it out, that I cannot answer. The first big question that has to be answered is, what is the ultimate structure of matter? Nobody's answered that question. No. At present, we've got a whole lot of mathematical theories. Some of them don't make any sense at all. I would suggest that all of them don't make any sense. So that's the first thing you need to know is, what is matter? What's its ultimate construction? And these are the kinds of questions we should be asking, not trying to make up stories about a beginning which begins with something which has nothing to do with science, and that is the singularity that became the Big Bang.
How about you, David?
Well, this is where human imagination, working with the tools of science today, just flails around trying to understand things that the tools couldn't possibly deliver to us as reliable answers. This is just the nature of the human predicament. In the end, there is more that will be revealed to us, I would say, from our own introspection and from our own reflections on the nature of the question and the answers that come to us when we ask, who am I? What is my relationship to other people? Why am I here? What is the purpose of life, or is there simply no purpose in life?
All $64,000 questions.
Yeah, and I just will go so far as to say I have chosen in my life the meaningful answer, the meaningful universe. It's not something to be defended in argument, but you do find a reason to assert the meaningful life as you experience connection to other people, and you see that this person is none other than myself.
We're coming back for final phone calls next on Coast to Coast AM. Hey, I'm going back to St. Louis for the June 18th live stage show event at the Lindenwood University. Full information at our highlight reel at coasttocoastam.com. If you're out there, if you want to hit that area, come on out. The tickets are going out the door, but you might as well grab a few as they fly by. Okay, welcome back to Coast. David Talbot, Wallace Thornhill, and your final calls. Wallace, we haven't talked too much about Mars. What do you think was Mars always a planet? Was it captured? And then some say that one of its moons might have been an asteroid.
That's true. In fact, there's very little difference between asteroids and Martian moons, and most of them have a similar origin. Mars was piecing together the information from the ancient petroglyphs and things like that. We can establish that Mars was a part of a a group of objects which was associated with the Earth from early times, and so it's a recent addition to the solar system as well as Venus. But it was captured, but the process of capture was devastating to that poor planet, so that it could quite possibly have had very similar conditions for life prior to the catastrophes. But it's had atmosphere, surface material, whatever water was there, stripped off it in the process of...
and it could have had some general life.
It could have had life, yeah, that's true.
Could that catastrophe happen here now on planet Earth?
Not now, unless we had another rearrangement of the solar system, in which case, all bets are off.
Sure. Oh, yeah. Or a life-threatening asteroid or something like that.
Well, one thing
it
I
would
might
have to be bigger than an asteroid. It would have to be, something planetary-sized, because, as I said,
okay.
The objects tend to avoid one another. So the Earth, and also the Earth has its own Space Wars type defense system. If an object gets close enough and it's electrically very different from the Earth, the two will exchange discharges which can destroy the incoming object. And in fact, there's good evidence that that's what happened at the Tunguska event in Russia back near, I think it was around 1905. And there was never any bolide found. It seems to have been destroyed on entry into the Earth's electrical environment.
David, your thoughts?
Yes, I was going to mention that the planet Mars has been a special interest of ours, and we have been particularly interested in the indications of planet-wide catastrophe. And perhaps the greatest testament to the planet-altering events in the Martian past is the hemispheric dichotomy. I mean, here you have a northern hemisphere of Mars that has basically lost sufficient surface to eliminate all of the cratering that would have been natural to that planet's evolution, since you only have to look at the southern hemisphere of Mars to see abundant cratering of the surface. Now, if Mars was in fact part of an earlier planetary system as we have reconstructed it, Mars would have been acted upon electrically, hemispherically. So electrical excavation of the surface of Mars is a fundamental tenet, actually, of the electric universe paradigm. Now, we have a video that, because it's free, I'm comfortable just mentioning this video. It's called The Lightning-Scarred Planet Mars. And if you will watch this video with just an openness to extraordinary possibilities, letting the evidence itself lead the way, I think you will feel very confident that the history of Mars does not look anything like the history of Mars as it's presented in textbooks today. That Mars was sculpted from pole to pole by electrical activity. This is the lightning-scarred planet Mars, lightning-scarred planet Mars, which is available at the thunderbolts.info website. It's for free viewing, the entire documentary, and it's been very persuasive with people in driving people to a completely new picture of Martian history, Earth history, and planetary history as a whole.
All right, let's wrap up this half hour with final phone calls. Joseph in Dayton, Ohio. Joseph, good morning.
Hi, Mr. Noory. How you doing?
Good, Joseph. Thank you.
Yeah, appreciate you taking my call, too, sir.
Okay.
It's a blessing to hear you every night, and everything else keeps me going through the night pretty much.
Perfect.
But I had a question for your guests here about atoms.
Okay.
And what's some electricity stuff to do with those. I'm trying to think of how to put it together here. My mind's kind of, I don't know, it's off the charts right now. But anyway, when it comes down to atoms and stuff, is it possible to charge an atom in some kind of a fashion? Because atoms, they're electrical too, right?
They sure are. And, we've got electrons and neutrons. And Wallace, jump in here and help us out.
Yeah. The atom is electrical. All the particles within it are electrical. So what were you going to suggest?
Would it be possible to charge an atom in a way that it would want to bind with the other atoms? Like, say it's just the atoms around air here, like nitrogen atoms or something like that. Would it be physically possible or even figuratively possible to charge those to bind together to create some kind of a little force field like you saw on those spaceships from Independence Day or something?
Interesting you should mention Independence Day. Just naturally, atoms adjust their charges so that they attract one another and form molecules and so on. That's just normal chemistry. The Independence Day film showed that incredible discharge that comes from the base of that alien spacecraft, and that is more or less a reconstruction of the plasma discharge in high-energy laboratories. It's called a plasma focus, which is a very interesting thing from the point of view of the plasma universe and the electric universe. But I won't go into that right now, but certainly chemistry can be understood in a different way because it has been admitted by chemists that they don't understand the chemical bond. And if they don't understand the chemical bond, then you've got to ask, well, do nuclear scientists understand the nucleus and the nuclear bond? And I suggest they don't. But when you do understand it, it offers a way for people to devise means of creating new compounds and nuclear reactions which at present seem impossible.
Hey, David, I found it fascinating that in all the Frankenstein movies, there's always electricity involved.
That's been a fascinating little sidelight, hasn't it? And actually, Wall might have something to say about the relationship of Frankenstein-type electrical phenomena to biological transformations of one kind or another. Well,
that's right, yes. There was a French guy who was a scientist who was recommended for the Nobel Prize, I believe, and he showed by simple experiments that you could do in a high school lab that biological systems are capable of performing nuclear reactions. So he's already laid the groundwork for beginning to understand how we might generate energy from the nucleus of an atom instead of just by chemistry, and therefore have simple access to power, unlimited power.
All right, let's go to Lorianne now in British Columbia in Canada. Hey, Lorianne, thank you.
Hi, thanks so much for taking my call.
Sure.
I want to ask your guest if this electrical universe could be possible, like the spontaneous combustion.
Sorry, I didn't.
Spontaneous combustion. There have been reports that people have combusted, just broke out into fires. I wonder if the electrical universe had anything to do with that.
I'm not sure if there have been some attempts to explain it naturally, and I think that must be the case, that there is a natural explanation for it. But I don't think it has anything per se to do with the electric universe. I could say more on the subject of ball lightning, but
right.
When it comes to that, I remember reading quite a bit about it some years ago, but I couldn't see how it would happen. But I know people have come up with theories.
Are there in your Thunderbolts of the Gods, we highlight a little bit on this, but how active is electricity and lightning in the universe, Wallace?
Oh, well, that's fundamental. In fact, by studying lightning on Earth, we will begin to understand more the electrical connection between the sun and the Earth, because even now it's not understood how lightning is generated. It may be a surprise to people to know that, but although we know what it does once it is formed, we don't know what causes it. I mean, they talk about the updrafts and downdrafts in a cloud, but that's a case of which came first. An electrical disturbance in a cloud is enough to create phenomenal updrafts or downdrafts. And then the question is, which comes first? Is it the electricity or is it the updrafts and the downdrafts?
Well, if I could just interject a question for Wal here. Wal, would you direct our attention to a connection of the Earth to its larger plasma environment as being essential, perhaps, to understanding the nature of lightning, that it isn't just a charge separation in the terms that they have localized the formation of lightning, but something going on between the Earth and its external plasma environment?
Yes, we've got all the evidence we need from those sprites and that, which have now been filmed from space. They've been filmed from high-altitude aircraft above big thunderstorms. That is the connection between the cloud and the ionosphere, and then scientists have also seen the connection between the ionosphere and the magnetosphere, and the astronomers have noted that there are so-called magnetic flux tubes, which is just a euphemism for electric currents flowing between the sun and the Earth. So it's all connected electrically. Once again, this is the thing about the electric universe. Everything is connected.
Let's go to Shay in Mississippi, first-time caller. Hello, Shay. Good morning.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for taking my call. Hi, George.
Very welcome. Thanks.
Hi, gentlemen.
Hi.
What I was calling about is, could it account the possibility that there was less gravity force on the ancient people of the world, which gave them ability to quarry these tons and tons of stone and move them around?
Absolutely so. And
Yeah, that is possible, yes. As I said, gravity is not understood currently. All we have are mathematical equations, and it's assumed that what we experience on Earth is the same everywhere, and the same goes for inside the Earth. But even experiments done down mines doesn't seem to match what we'd expect from Newton's law of gravity. The electric universe says no, that the gravity on Earth is determined to a large extent by the charge on the surface of the Earth. So if you change the charge, the Earth's gravity will change. And the best evidence that it's changed dramatically is that the dinosaurs existed, and they were so huge that if they were in present-day gravity, they could not lift themselves off the ground.
How could this universe be so packed with electrical charges and it not, blow up?
Well, that's not the tendency of electricity. It tends to find balance, and this is the essential nature that we observe of the universe, that it appears to be in balance. You can't get that if all you've got is a force like gravity, which currently is believed to be only attractive, because then all you have are explosions and collisions to deal with, which is a pretty limited toolbox.
Jerry in southern Indiana. Hey, Jerry, go ahead.
Hi, George. First-time caller. Great show tonight. Great guest.
Thank you.
You guys mentioned before the last break anti-gravity, and then earlier, you discussed gravity as attracting and, of course, at a certain point, repelling. So it just made me think, is electricity or maybe electromagnetism, could that be used to create a gravitational field? And theoretically, could that field be modulated so as to be used in a vehicle to make that vehicle repel or attract to a body such as a planet? So essentially, could electricity be the key to anti-gravity flight?
30 seconds. Wallace, take it.
I believe that anti-gravity is possible. It does not necessarily involve charging things up. It may be as simple as understanding the gyroscope, because it behaves strangely in the gravitational field. And I think I know why it does that.
Indeed it does. Hey, both of you, thank you, David and Wallace. Appreciate you being on the program.
Righto.
And good luck with your book, The Electric Universe. All details, all the websites, always are linked up for you at coasttocoastam.com. For Jeff Duray, Dan Galante, Donna Walker, Tom Danheiser, Lisa Lyon, Lex Lonehood, Sean Ladouceur, Stephanie Smith, Chris Boros, and George Knapp. I'm George Noory, somewhere out there on Coast to Coast AM. We'll see you on our next edition. Until then.